If you're someone who feels you have trouble in your relationships or connecting and communicating with the people in your life that are important to you, pay attention because I'm going to teach you what I learned recently that was game changer for me. Completely revolutionized the way I looked at all my relationships and helped me make some really difficult decisions in my relationship. Let's start with how I thought about relationships before. I was raised with the idea of unconditional love, which is a great concept and sounds amazing. But in reality, I think we all kind of know on some level that there's a limit. There are things that someone can do that we're like, okay, we're just not going to mess with that person anymore. You might say, hey, I still love you as a human being, but I can't have you in my life. Okay? And this, now, where that line lies is going to be different for everybody and every relationship. But, so in my mind, these two concepts were opposed. That there's an idea of something as unconditional love, and that there's a line at which you would just X somebody out of your life. And so I had trouble reconciling those things. And then I heard something explained to me that was really kind of profound and game changing. And that is the idea that all relationships are transactional. And that really at first grated on me. And it might grate on you. The idea that you're in a relationship with somebody to get something out of them. Because transactional means an exchange. The economics. You go to a store, you buy something and you give them money in exchange. That's a transaction. And a lot of times we don't want to think about our personal relationships like that. You know, you might have that kind of relationship with the cashier at the grocery store or the bartender or server at the restaurant or whatever, but we don't want to think we have those kinds of relationships with the people in our lives, like our partners, our family, our friends. But we do. But the commodities being exchanged aren't goods for services usually. And this is where you really got to kind of be really honest with yourself and be able to set aside your preconceived notions and begin to look at your relationships differently, but in a much healthier way. Let's look at some really obvious transactional relationships. Some of the most popular, or not most popular, most common transactional relationships that come to mind that I see a lot in today are sugar daddy, sugar baby relationships. Now on the surface, a lot of people judge these relationships. You have usually an older gentleman with financial means who is willing to pay bills, buy gifts for, take a younger attractive woman on trips or vacations or out to dinner or wherever. And it seems very transactional. I mean, it doesn't really seem that different from prostitution. And I'm going to talk about prostitution. The exchange is money for time, but the exchange is actually the time that they spend together. They might be getting something different out of it that we don't see, something below the surface, because we don't see the emotional exchange. For example, I heard a TikTok the other day about this gentleman who came into the same restaurant every day, the same day, because everybody there said hi to him and asked him how his day was, and that was the only time. He was an older gentleman who didn't have a partner and didn't have any family, so he was alone most of the time, and nobody else asked about his day. And he knew when he went to this restaurant, they were going to ask about his day, say hi to him, smile at him, made him feel good. That's transactional. He knew what he was there for, and they were doing it because it was their job, but it was also the only way he got that. You look at a sugar daddy, sugar baby relationship, and that might be the same thing. That relationship might be, being willing to exchange the money to take someone on vacation or pay their bills or whatever, take them out to dinner, in exchange for someone who's going to listen to you in conversation, someone who's going to engage with you and interact with you and treat you like a human being. That might be the only way this person thinks they can get that. And so they're getting an emotional fulfillment in exchange for a financial investment. And on the other hand, the woman would be doing something that's very easy for her. If she's young and she's attractive and popular, it's really easy for her to connect with people. So it's not costing her a lot. But in exchange, she's getting things that are harder for her to get because she's younger, not as far along in her career, not as financially secure, so she can't necessarily as easily pay her bills, and she can't go on the nice vacations that she would love to, but that she sees on Instagram and social media and stuff, other people doing. She couldn't do it otherwise, so she's getting something in exchange too. There can be an exchange there that is beyond the tangible exchange that those of us outside the relationship don't see. I was recently introduced to a podcast by two people I know personally. As a bartender, I've met them. And they're both prostitutes, and they have a podcast about them and their entry into the career and the fulfillment they get out of that career and the relationships they have with their clients. I'm going to leave a link to that below because I think everyone should check it out. It'll really change the way you see sex industry. And I'm not promoting, I understand absolutely, there are the majority of people in the sex industry are exploited. That needs to be regulated and destigmatized so that that's prevented. There are also people who enter into it willingly and get a great amount of fulfillment out of it. So it needs to be, just because it's bad for one person doesn't mean it's bad for another person. Hope you have an open mind about that. If you personally or you know anybody that's being trafficked or exploited, absolutely seek help, please. I don't want to say I'm encouraging any of that, but if you find fulfillment from that industry, then great, good for you. Go about doing your thing, and hopefully you have the best life you can. This podcast talks about, and I've had personal conversations with these women about how they interact with their clients, and most of the time it's not even really about sex. It's about somebody who will just allow them to be themselves, and often in a sexual way that they feel ashamed to explore with someone else. They feel like they'll be judged. And so being able to explore that in a way where you're not judged is a transaction. And so they're exchanging money for that emotional support, ability to explore themselves in a way they wouldn't otherwise be able to. Along the same lines, there's a big trend right now for trad wives, traditional wives, trending on social media, and women who seek that kind of relationship. And if you think about that, that is also an exchange of goods and services for money. You know, you have the husband who goes out and works and brings in the money, pays the bills, supports the household financially, and then you have the wife who cooks and cleans and takes care of the kids and all those things, and gets that in exchange. And for a long time, that was the standard. And then it became very frowned upon because women wanted to have more freedom. And now there's a trend of some women wanting to go back to that model. The difference being, and this is really important, that until like the 70s, I think it was, women couldn't get a mortgage on their own. They couldn't get a credit card on their own. There were very few job opportunities for them outside of, especially not in an executive level or anything like that. So they were kind of forced into the trad wife position. There was not really other options. Whereas now, where they have those options and they choose it, it's a completely different scenario. So those are some examples where it's really easy to see both a financial exchange of goods and services, but there's also an underlying emotional exchange there too, because we're talking about relationships where somebody's getting an emotional return for their investment that they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise, or they wouldn't find it easy to get otherwise. Now, how does this apply to your own personal relationships where there may not be an obvious exchange? This is where you need to look at other things besides goods and services as an exchange. For example, if somebody just makes you feel good, you want to spend time in their presence. So a lot of times you'll want to do things to make them feel good, so they'll want to spend time with you. That's an exchange. You're exchanging whatever you're doing for them, maybe buying them gifts or going to do whatever event they want to do, so that you will get to spend time with them, so that you can feel good about yourself, because they make you feel good. They make you laugh. They make you feel loved and looked at and seen and cared for and all those things. So there's an exchange going on there. How do we define healthy and unhealthy transactional relationships? If all relationships are transactional, how do we define the healthy ones versus the unhealthy ones? Well, it's really pretty simple. There's two approaches. The healthy approach is where both parties come out better than they were before. So in a monetary exchange, goods for services, we'll say, you go to a store to buy something. You have money. They have a good that you need. They have a product that you need. You go in, you get the product, you give them the money. Well, they now have made a profit on that product, and so they're better off than they were. You have given them money that to you was of lesser value than whatever value you're going to get for the product. So now you have profited in a useful way, so you're better. You're both better off. And the same thing applies to your personal relationships. If the sum total of you and your other person being together having that relationship makes you both feel you have profited, yet you are better than you were before, then that is a healthy relationship. It's pretty simple. An unhealthy relationship is where it's treated as a zero-sum game. That person has something I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get that. And if that includes harming that person, manipulating them, coercing them, pressuring them, hurting them in some way, then that's an unhealthy relationship. That's where you're looking to take something. A lot of times we are all guilty of unintentionally getting into those kinds of relationships. We see somebody, we meet somebody, and we get something out of them that we find fulfilling, and we look for ways to fulfill them that will get us those things. It could be sex, it could be time spent together, it could be anything. There's something that shoulder to cry on, and what we give them in exchange is what we might want if we were in their position, but it's not what they want, and so they don't actually end up being better off than they were before us. It's a kind of a one-sided relationship. It's unhealthy, and if you find yourself in that position, you really need to evaluate whether you're willing to do what it is they need to be better off in that relationship, and whether you're willing to do, and whether they're giving you what you want. Because a lot of times we find ourselves on the opposite end of that, where somebody's giving us something that they feel like they would want in exchange for what we're giving them, and we're investing a lot of ourselves emotionally in them and not really getting anything in return. And these kinds of relationships very often creep up slowly. They don't start that way, because in the beginning of a relationship you have this great new relationship energy, everything's fantastic, and it kind of slowly shifts over to that, where you're not really getting what you need out of that relationship. You're not getting a fair exchange in the transaction. This is where we then begin to get into unhealthy relationships, lack of communication, lack of boundary setting, and all those types of things that a lot of people find really uncomfortable. But the first thing you need to do is recognize, are you getting what you need out of that relationship? And if you're not, what is it that you do need out of that relationship? Once you know what that is, you have an obligation. If you want to continue that relationship, it is on you to communicate that. So in the book, I think it was No More Mr. Nice Guy, which I have here somewhere. Yeah, I think it's No More Mr. Nice Guy by Glover. He talks about something, and it talks about basically the nice guy syndrome. He's a therapist who works with men who deal with being nice guys, which we all know are really kind of covert creeps and jerks who don't understand certain social things. One of the things he talks about is called the covert contract. And that is where a guy will do things for a woman under the concept, the idea in his head that she is then going to want to be his girlfriend, give him sex, whatever it is that he's seeking, but he never communicates that to her. And so when she breaks the deal that he thought they had, he gets really mad. He gets really angry. She had no idea that he expected these things. It's the guy who'll come and get you when your car breaks down. And he thinks that, well, in exchange, you're going to like him better. You're going to dump your boyfriend and want to be his boyfriend and whatnot. And you're like, no, you're my friend. This is what friends do for each other, right? See a disconnect? So that is a unhealthy transactional relationship, because they're on different pages. They're expecting different things. And that's on him because he didn't communicate what he needed. But women do a similar thing. They say, well, my partner should just know. But they're not communicating what they need, and they get mad at their partner for not automatically knowing what is expected of them. When a woman's having a problem, she wants to vent to her boyfriend or her partner, and then suddenly he's like, well, did you talk to them? Maybe you need to talk to your boss about that. This is blah, 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 all these things. He's offering solutions, and she just wanted somebody to listen. Well, she didn't communicate that. If she didn't say, hey, I don't want solutions, I just want to vent, she's expecting him to be a mind reader. That's that covert contract. Again, it's the same thing. If you don't communicate what you need, and you don't get it, you can't be mad because you didn't tell them. After you understand what it is you're looking for in a relationship, you need to then communicate it. And then it's on them to either give it to you or not. And if they're not going to give it to you, then you need to decide whether you're going to continue that relationship. Like I said, most of these relationships that aren't working anymore, they usually happen over time. You hear it often said that people grow apart, and that happens. You have different experiences, you have different goals, your life takes you in different directions. But a lot of times, one person will stay more invested in that relationship than the other because they think that they're going to get something out of it that they're not going to get anymore. Maybe they got it before and they're not going to get it anymore, or maybe their needs have changed and they haven't communicated it to the person. And so they're hoping that person is going to pick up on it and give it to them, but they're not. I recently went through an example of this where I've had some friends for years and I experienced a personal crisis and they just kind of actually experienced several personal crises, and I realized later that they didn't call and check up on me. They didn't ask about my relationship that had ended. They didn't ask about how I was doing after changing jobs and getting into a job that turned out not to be as advertised and was really really unhappy. They didn't check in on me. They didn't call. They didn't want to see how I was doing. They were doing all the usual things, texting memes and planning events, like going out to dinner, those kinds of things. But the conversations about how I was doing never ever came up. And it took me a long time to realize that that wasn't happening anymore. I realized that this was not a relationship that was working for me anymore. And it didn't make it easy to walk away from it, but it became a relationship that I had to walk away from. At the same time, in my life, at the same time, someone else who's relatively new in my life had their own personal crisis, was going through a lot, and I didn't really even know what they were going through. I just got the sense that they were kind of upset about something. So I just asked him, "Hey man, are you good?" He was really taken aback by that. And he's like, I'm not good. And he started to tell me what was going on with him. For the next couple days afterwards, like, he couldn't stop telling me like how much that meant to him because other people in his life had not noticed, had not reached out, had not tried to see how he was doing. And that was something that was missing from his life. And so now him and I are much closer than we were before because of that, just because I gave him something he needed. At the same time, I gave him something he needed when friends of mine were not giving me something I needed. So relationships move on and they change. But that's what I mean by the transactional relationship. You've got to be kind of aware of what it is you need out of a relationship and whether you're getting it. And then if you are, great. And if you're not, you need to identify what it is and communicate it. And if you're not getting it and they're not willing to give it to you, then it's time to let that relationship go. And that can be hard. That can be difficult. But if it's one-sided, where they're taking something from you and you're not getting anything in exchange, then that's not a healthy relationship. I hope this has been really helpful. My name is Charles. I'm the founder of Revelcraft Life Coaching. If you need some help with your relationships as far as setting boundaries, identifying what your needs are, that is something that coaching can help. In the link below or in the profile, depending on where you're seeing this, there's a link to set up a free consultation with me. I'd be happy to talk to you for a few minutes and see if working with me might help you with those problems. Love y'all. Peace out.